afternoon. As you can tell by my accent, I am not from Washington, D.C. I'm from a little further south than that, and it is a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon. I have been to this region. I come to Pennsylvania often, but I've been to this region once before. I was at Valley Forge, not with Washington, a little later than that. I was a Boy Scout at the National Jamboree, and I was 13 years old. So it's good to be back. It's been too long since I've been to this part of Pennsylvania. I'm very pleased with what the foundation is doing in regards to educating the public about the necessity of public transportation. And you mentioned the youth. Keep in mind that our decisions about land use, about where we choose to live and work and be educated is really driven by two polar generations. The baby boom population, which is the largest generation ever in the history of this country with the longest life expectancy of any generation in the history of the country. And the other generation is the millennial generation, which represents 1/3 of the population and the growth of the population there. So you have two polar generations. I represent one of those generations that are driving the decision making in this country. And they are making similar choices. They're choosing to live in dynamic places, large and small, where they can easily walk to work or to education or to entertainment, where they can take public transportation that's easy and accessible, and those communities that understand the two generations that they're seeking to recruit into their community and will serve will position themselves for growth in the future and for economic development in the future. And those who turn a blind eye to that will suffer from those decisions. So as was said, I'm John Robert Smith. I'm chairman of Transportation for America, and I served 16 years as the mayor of my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. I was Republican mayor there for 16 years. And this is our Union Station in Meridian. It was the first multimodal transportation center in the South, built almost 20 years ago, bringing all modes of transportation together there, one of the first in the country. You know, we're facing transportation challenges. We have an aging infrastructure. We know that we have not invested in the upkeep of our roads, bridges, rail, public transportation. We have these growing populations that I've referred to, two demographic changes that are driving many choices in this country, and our transportation funding is stagnant. We worked hard on the Transportation Authorization Bill, MAP 21. It took Congress 3 years to pass a 2-year bill, and our trust fund was broke in 2008. It took general fund infusions of cash just for it to limp along. The trust fund will once again be broke in late 2014. This is an issue we can't back away from. We did a study on just the bridges in this country, and the structurally deficient bridges, of which there are 60,000, if we link them end on end, would stretch from DC to Denver, Colorado. And we're not beginning to really address that issue alone. We built the interstate highway system in the 20th century. That was our last real vision of connecting regions, but now the need is a little different. We need to connect within those regions so that these regional economies, which are the foundation of a robust national economy, will have the opportunity to thrive. And we think that empowering these metropolitan regions, and especially local elected officials, local chambers, local business people, they make the best decisions. They're closest to the people they serve. And as we look at the nexus of transportation in this country, you see the interstate highway system there in black. You see conventional passenger rail in the green, the interstate system, the high-speed rail system there in the red overlay. You see the airport hubs. What I want you to see on this map is there's a confluence of transportation choices, but there are also regions of this country, obviously, where there are major gaps in those transportation choices. As I said, I was the mayor of my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi for 16 years, and while I am quite sure you're very familiar with Meridian, Mississippi, and can find it on a map and know all about us, just to refresh your memory, Meridian is a city of 42,000 people on the Mississippi-Alabama border, but we are the retail, educational, employment, entertainment, healthcare draw for 350,000 people in 7 rural counties that surround Meridian. If Meridian were to go away tonight, 350,000 people either have to move or rebuild that city. We're located on 2 interstate highways that you see that connect us to Atlanta, to Dallas, and to New Orleans. We're also served by the longest runway in 2 states. It's a 2-mile runway. Can land any kind of aircraft there. We train 60% of the strike pilots for the U.S. Navy, and we have an air reconnaissance and refueling wing. Anything that leaves my part of the world by air must first go to Atlanta Hartsfield, and we're fortunate to have that connection. I firmly believe that when my spirit leaves this body, it will first go to Atlanta Hartsfield, where it will then be reassigned to one of 2 other permanent destinations. We're also on the Amtrak Crescent Line, which I like to believe originates in Meridian and heads north to New York, and originates in Meridian and heads south to New Orleans. But that tells you where Meridian is. It doesn't tell you who we are or why we are. And I think there are 3 questions any community, large or small, needs to ask itself as it is seeking its future course and its place in its region in the nation. And the first of those questions is, who are you? Who were you? Why did your forefathers create a city there? Well, for us, it was the crossing of 2 railroads, and they literally needed a city to grow up and serve that railroad infrastructure. Meridian was founded in 1850, incorporated in 1860, and grew to be an important railhead in the southeast until the spring of 1864, when General William Tecumseh Sherman arrived in Meridian with 10,000 federal troops drawn by that railroad infrastructure. Now, the general was thorough, if nothing else, and brought his own brand of urban renewal to Meridian, where he burned every structure in the city to the ground, heated the rails, tied them around trees to form what was known as Sherman's bow ties, and wired Lincoln and the War Department. Meridian no longer exists, creating what historian Bruce Catton called a smoky darkness at midday in Meridian. But 28 days after the general left, the people of Meridian had rebuilt that railroad infrastructure. Because you see, they understood not only was transportation, and the railroad in particular, their reason for being, it would be their way out of this disaster. Meridian was rebuilt in the 1870s and 80s by German Jewish immigrants who came to Meridian. Again, because of the transportation infrastructure that connected them to over 70% of the southeast population within a day or 2 of travel, located wholesale, mercantile industries in Meridian. And Meridian grew and was a thriving city, the largest city in Mississippi at one time. But we walked away from that which was our strength and our heritage, and we forgot that. So the second question you must ask yourself as a community is, but who are you now? And that must be a very clear, brave assessment of who you are. And as you look, this is what remained of our once grand Union Station in Meridian. You might say it doesn't show much, but actually it tells you a whole lot. It tells you that we had turned our back on our history, turned our back on our transportation strengths, and worse yet, we had turned our back on our future. The third question, and perhaps the most important, is, but who do you aspire to be? This was our 1907 Union Station built in Meridian. That structure says something about the people who built it, but about who they believed Meridian would be for the next 100 years. Hopefully our Union Station will speak to our grandchildren in such a way in the future. You have to have a vision to inspire a community. Your people can't see that which is not before them, so you have to create those images for them. And yes, there is a beacon out of the top of Union Station, not unlike a beacon at an airport, drawing people off those two interstate highways just a few blocks from this facility into the downtown, whether you're arriving by rail or intercity bus or the city transit system. For me, it was an economic development project of taking that nexus of people's energy around transportation and translating that into economic opportunity for those historic structures in the downtown and the merchants who worked there. We had to overcome a lot to be successful in this effort, and you're seeing some images of that station there. I believe a city has a personality just like a human being does, and you can sense it when you walk into the community. For us, it was an inferiority complex. Why can't we be like Jackson? Why can't we be like Tupelo or Hattiesburg or Gulfport? Well, we don't have their assets. But I would argue we have assets they don't, and if we are smart enough to play to those strengths and assets, then we can be competitive and even more successful. We had not invested in our infrastructure. We certainly would do nothing in creative financing. The mayor couldn't talk to the city council, much less the city council talk to the board of supervisors. No partnerships there. The business community had totally pulled back from the city and the downtown. We had begun to build those disposable buildings of the 50s and 60s to show we were good stewards of the public purse. We built buildings without any aesthetic quality whatsoever, buildings that belonged to the people without any aesthetic quality. And they certainly said nothing positive about the people of that day. That kind of attitude will breed failure, and it had done so in Meridian. Our multimodal transportation center, though, needed partners. We certainly needed Mississippi Department of Transportation, and I found that they had something there called Transportation Enhancement Funds, federal funds, and we don't like to give federal money back to the federal government. Mississippi DOT had these Transportation Enhancements Funds. They didn't have a project to spend it on. Well, I felt I could relieve them of that burden. I also needed my congressional delegation because midway through the construction of this project, Amtrak called to say they were cutting service south of Atlanta. Well, there goes one of my big modes. And the last time someone from Washington expressed interest in the trains in Meridian, it was General Sherman. So I know how that plays out, and I called junior senator at the time, Trent Lott, and I said, Trent, the Yankees are after our trains again. But I took Trent on board the Amtrak Crescent because I needed a champion. And he got to speak to the single parents, taking their children to visit their grandmother in Birmingham, and the only way they could get there was by that train. He talked to the elderly couples that had worked hard all of their lives, and they wanted to see this great country, and they didn't want to be beaten to death on the interstate highway system. And he got to talk to the disabled vets that were on board, who flying out of Meridian really wasn't a dignified option for them, but they could travel by that train. And then we went to the last car that had the children of the Special Olympics from all over the state of Mississippi traveling to Washington to compete in the National Special Olympic Games. We got to the end of that train and I turned to him and I said, "Now, Senator, do we walk back through and tell them that this great country can't afford this train that means so much to them?" I had my champion. And when the bill was passed to authorize passenger rail, it was known as the Lott-Lautenberg bill. Conservative Republican from Mississippi, liberal Democrat from New Jersey. But those two men had a problem to solve, and they each realized the other needed to win. And passenger rail looked a little different in New Jersey than it did in Mississippi, but they knew it was important to the people they served. It's a shame we've lost that ability in Washington right now. Perhaps we'll get it back. Certainly, I do the modes of transportation, whether it was intercity bus or city transit or Amtrak, were important to our project, but I was surprised at what it could do for affordable and public housing in my community, or the impact it would have on further historic restoration for us, or the entertainment and convention capabilities it would bring. We were funded principally, as I said, with iced-tea money. The city had $1.3 million in this $6 million project. This was 20 years ago, and in Mississippi, $6 million could buy you a really fine building. I went to every club, whether it was the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club or the church functions, because I needed the public to give me the authority to spend that $1.3 million in city funds. And I was speaking one night at a church out in the edge of the unincorporated part of Meridian, and I was talking to them about the $5 million in iced tea money I had, and an elderly gentleman had come in late on the presentation, and all he was hearing me say is, "Got $5 million in iced tea money, and it's going to restore vitality." And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Son, you really have $5 million in iced tea money?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he said, "And you believe it's going to restore vitality?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he said, "I don't know what you've been putting in that iced tea you've been selling, but I want a glass of it." You know, as you begin to build, you have to be sensitive to your city and your community and your region's history, and that reflected this is the back of Union Station. You see the Kansas City Southern and Norfolk Southern business trains there. They frequently make a stop there in Meridian as they are taking their boards and others around the country. Kansas City Southern's new office building, they will tell you, copied many elements out of our station. These are some of the shots of the interior. We could have built it more cheaply, but it would not have had the economic impact that it had to our community. It's the most heavily used public space in our region now. Almost every evening or day there are events there. It draws 300,000 people through that station. Now, if you're a city of 40,000 and you can draw 300,000 through your downtown through that facility over a year, then think of what that creates as opportunities for meals and for retail and for entertainment. And it's been embraced by the public for reunions and for weddings and anniversaries, as well as for the many business functions that we predicted. Ridership certainly went up on both of the principal modes of transportation that are served out of the facility. But what really surprised even me, as optimistic as I am, is it created $135 million of additional public-private sector investment within 3 blocks of that facility. So when you take the city's $1.3 million, that's a 100-to-1 return on the people's money. Not a bad deal. Right across the street is the Terminal Hotel, which is really office suites. now on the upper floor. This building is owned by Gil Carmichael. Some of you may remember Gil, a former Federal Railroad administrator, also from Meridian. Business offices on the top floor. The first floor still has the rather unfortunately named Terminal Cafe. There are specialty retail shops have given the first floors of these historic buildings additional life, and there are market rate apartments and upscale condominiums that have moved in. This building, the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built it, restored this building. Retail first floor, 8 condominiums on the second floor that sold for $250,000 apiece, 4 condominiums on the top floor, $500,000 apiece, unfinished space. And this is in a city of 40,000 people. Really brings life back into one's downtown. It led to the restoration of our 1914 Beaux-Arts City Hall, exterior of white glazed terracotta. Archives and History calls it the single most important historic restoration in Mississippi of this decade. It even inspired things like our new central fire station and gave us the opportunity to create once again public parks and spaces within the downtown. And yes, for those of you in Pennsylvania, it does snow in Mississippi. About every 10 years we get 3 inches. And it'll last 24 hours. So we really have to struggle at those times. But it draws people and vitality into that downtown. When you look at healthcare, I mentioned we were a regional healthcare, 3 large hospitals. They were having trouble recruiting the professional staff they needed because that staff was looking for a downtown that was alive, that had something to do after 5 o'clock. So the hospitals became very engaged in what we were doing, and they need those transportation connections, because when a family comes from the county to seek health care, they bring the whole family in, and they will stay with you for a week, and they've got to be connected into the rest of your community. Our investment also led to the creation of the Mississippi State University Performing Arts and Conference Center there. You see an 1890 department store, Marx Rothenberg department store, an 1889 Grand Opera House. That opera house was designed by the firm that designed the original Metropolitan Grand Opera House in New York, which New York demolished. We restored ours. It had been an empty pigeon coop for most of my life. This was one of the last projects that we did. Double horseshoe balconies, over 30 original wall coverings and fabrics recreated, original paint finishes, just a splendid facility there where you will see Itzhak Perlman and the Meridian Symphony or the Soweto Gospel Choir, or Wynton Marsalis and the Kennedy Center Orchestra. Hal Holbrook performed Mark Twain's Night, came back on stage and said it's one of the top 2 venues he's performed in his life. No seat is more than 80 feet from center stage. So imagine what that kind of entertainment, our draw is much greater than 350,000 people now. But it's not just about how you build in the downtown, it's also about where people live. We were the first multimodal transportation center in the South. We were the last Hope 6 project in the country. A $17 million Hope 6 that we worked on for 7 years to get approval, but it leveraged a $60 million investment in public and affordable housing. I did that with the strong support of my 2 Republican senators, Republican congressmen, and Republican governor. As I said, I was a Republican mayor for 16 years. It transforms how people live. I can put you in a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath home for $70,000. Give you a $10,000 down payment assistance. You work that off by volunteering in whether it's the Red Cross or the United Way, and in 5 years, that $10,000 is forgiven. So now it's a $60,000 home, 3-bedroom, 2.5 baths. First time in anyone's history of those families that they have home ownership. And let me tell you what happens when something like this becomes real. Instead of saying, I stay at such and such a place, the people who live here say, I live at such and such an address. And the difference between staying and living is ownership. And it's ownership not so much in that structure, but in the future of that community. You believe you matter. And it changes for the children as you build quality playgrounds in your older neighborhoods, and you provide safe routes to school and sidewalks for children to be able to walk to get to their elementary and secondary schools. But it's all got to be connected by transportation choices. You'd be surprised at the members of Congress who say, well, I don't have any public transportation in my district. Well, that DAV van is public transportation. So for us, it can be church vans, private vans, it can be the city rubber-tired trolley. One of the things that we were asked to do in order to preserve our Navy base was to provide transit connections the 12 miles out to the base to connect those young people back into the Meridian. It's all about the transportation links and a seamless transportation experience. And it's not just in Meridian. Look at what's happened in Charlotte's Blue Line, where it has been so incredibly successful in bringing back neighborhood and economic development and investment. The line is being expanded. You'll see the other side of the street put into the same kind of more dense residential and mixed use and retail spaces. Nashville's working at a transit plan. Why? Because they have to. They're going to pick up 1 million new residents in the next 15 years. How are they going to move them around? They have an aging population as well. So they must solve their transit plan, not only for Nashville, Davidson County, but the surrounding counties around it, and the smaller cities like Franklin, Tennessee, that want to retain their culture, but they want to be linked into the economic development of the region. Nashville's plan took many partners coming to the table, and I think that's what we're seeing across the country. I see it whether the mayors are Democrats or Republicans. They understand the importance of transportation choice for their people. New Orleans, certainly the streetcar has been historic, but they have a very adventurous project going on in New Orleans now that they want to take I-10 down to the surface so they can reconnect Treme once again. They have the exciting streetcar out Loyola connecting to their Union Station there, but also they have a new streetcar going in Rampart, again connecting to wonderful neighborhoods. This is a plan of the mixed use that will go in around the Rampart development in New Orleans, and that's a public-private sector investment between the city and the local developer there. Indianapolis, largest city with a Republican mayor, but yet understand very clearly the importance of building out transit connecting the outer suburbs, smaller cities and towns, and the neighborhoods throughout Indianapolis. I have a letter from the president of Grinnell College in Iowa. It's a well-noted college, but they are struggling to continue to recruit the professors and the student body from across the country and across the world that they have been so successful with because of transportation connections. They don't have a way to get to Chicago, and not only students but professors as well want to get away and experience the closest city. So it impacts education, it impacts healthcare. MAP 21, there's $4 billion less nationwide. We fought off issues where they would have taken all public transit out of the trust fund. That would have been the end of public transit as we know it. They were going to cut all transportation funding by 35%. We found that if you want to find innovation in this country, go to the local level. Your mayors and your boards of supervisors They're the innovators in this country. Certainly it's about job creation, but it can't be just about cities doing it by themselves. They need a strong partner at the state and federal level. Now, a lot of what I've talked about requires a vision that's much greater than certainly most of us electeds can have or struggle with. And honestly, it can be larger than some communities and regions are capable of, because what I'm describing for a place can't be captured in a 4-year vision or even a 16-year vision. I'm talking about a 30, a 50-year vision. And in order to have that kind of commitment and persistence, you have to be able to raise your eyes above the horizon line and fix your gaze on a point in the future that is critically important to you that you very well may not occupy. And for me, I find that future point reflected in the eyes of my grandson Ethan and his baby brother Hayden. They live in the house their great-grandfather built, the 5th generation to grow up there. But if we don't get our decisions right now in how we connect that community within itself and to the greater region and to economic vitality, then Ethan and Hayden aren't going to be able to find a meaningful, rewarding life in their hometown. They won't be able to remain in the home that their great-grandfather built or ride a train out of the station their grandfather built. And I think this sense of generational connectivity, of one leader working and passing the baton to the next group of leaders, is best captured in the poetry of Vachel Lindsay when he was writing about his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. The poet reminds us, record it for the grandson of your son. A city is not built in a day. Our little town cannot complete her soul till countless generations pass away. We must have Lincoln-hearted men, for a city is not built in a day. And they must do their work and come and go while countless generations pass away. I urge you, be Lincoln-hearted in your commitment to those people and places you love, your hometowns. Thank you.